Who really leads the British Army? An officer or the NCOs? Ask any soldier and you will get a different answer. Some will say officers call the shots, others will say the NCOs run absolutely everything. But what's the actual truth? Who's right, who's wrong, and what is just plain rubbish? The age-old debate about who really runs things and what the most important role is has been around forever. If you've delved into the comments of any of my previous videos, you will have probably seen people, usually dejected soldiers, gobbing off about how officers do absolutely nothing and NCOs run everything. So in this video, I'm going to unpack it. I'm going to be as unbiased as I possibly can to give you the information on what good actually looks like, who actually does what, and how a platoon really operates. So, without further ado, let's get into the video. Okay guys, welcome back to the channel, and this is a video I've been wanting to make for ages, to be honest with you. I am sick to death of comments basically saying how officers do nothing, and I think officers do get a pretty bad rep. And in this video, I want to make it more apparent as to who does what in each platoon. And if you are an aspiring officer that is watching this video, then also to give you the information so you know better about how a platoon operates and also what leadership looks like. So that's what we want to delve into in this video. Yes, I am an ex-army officer, so I really want to be as unbiased as I can in that video. So I do implore you, we're going to unpack everything. So I do encourage you to watch the whole video so you get an understanding of where I'm coming from with each point that I make. The first part I want to unpack is the platoon structure. How is it actually structured? So firstly, at the top of a platoon is a platoon commander. That is a commissioned officer, usually a direct entry officer, typically a young person who has just finished Sandhurst and just finished Brecon if we're looking at the infantry. When I say finished Brecon, they finished a course in the Brecon Beacons called the Platoon Commander's Battle Course. It's a 3-month course, which basically means that you are then qualified to go and command an infantry platoon. That platoon commander is in command of and ultimately responsible for that platoon. Next to him, you've got a platoon sergeant. Okay, so the platoon sergeant supports, and we'll get into the roles, responsibilities, and all that stuff in a second. But the platoon sergeant also makes up what we call the platoon headquarters. That is the command element, if you like, of that top bit of the platoon, right? And basically, if you go up the British Army, or if you come down from the very top, it's all structured in a similar-ish way, where you've got a similar command structure. It just varies dependent on the size of the unit. So platoon commander, platoon sergeant. Under them, you have 3 sections, and 3 sections are led by, you guessed it, 3 section commanders, or a single section commander per section. Supporting him is a section 2IC. So similar to platoon commander and platoon sergeant, also known as the 2IC. You then have 3 sections, each led by a section commander who is a corporal, and supporting him is a lance corporal or a section 2IC. And then under them, so you have 3 sections, and under them is usually about 6 soldiers. Okay, they might have different roles and responsibilities within the platoon. Depends really what you're on and also what the platoon is. But typically you've then got 6 soldiers who are private soldiers. That is how a platoon is structured. For this video, I'm going to focus on the platoon commander as the officer and the platoon sergeant and the 3 section commanders, the 3 corporals, as the NCOs. Okay, moving on to part 2 of this video, and we're going to focus on the officer. What does that platoon commander actually do? What are his roles? What are his responsibilities? Firstly, they are ultimately responsible for the entire platoon. I have lost count the amount of times when I was a platoon commander for being brought into an office by my chain of command and asked a question on a soldier for they had done something random, and then somehow it was my fault or my responsibility, right? So ultimately you're responsible for how that platoon functions and the people within it. That can break down into a few different ways. So we're going to look at what's your roles and responsibilities on operations first. When you're on operations, let's say you're obviously going to be deployed, and as an officer, you're very much in control of the planning element. You will get your orders and they will come down from your company commander or company 2IC, and you will then have to dilute those orders and translate them into something that is meaningful for the platoon, and then also give your stamp of what you want the platoon to do and what effect you want to have on the battle space or whatever theatre you're operating in. So a lot of planning goes into that, a lot of giving orders, And you're also responsible for how it ties into the bigger picture. So each platoon is part of a company, so you are responsible for understanding your role within the company context, but also the battle group context, so the bigger picture, if you like. That is kind of what you're responsible for on operations. You are also responsible for execution. So whatever that plan is, how it goes down on the ground, ultimately you're responsible for that and making sure that every person knows their job, but you have support from the NCOs to make that happen. So that's kind of how it works on operations. In camp, we're going to focus on more of like welfare, planning, exercises, training, and all of that stuff. Everyone kind of has a role, but ultimately the platoon commander is responsible for that. Making sure that soldiers have the necessary qualifications, whether that's military qualifications or whether that's other qualifications, maths, English, could be specific things they need to do to make sure, as in the soldiers, to make sure that they're promoting on time or whatever. Then there's the military courses that they need to do to promote. So you're very much in charge of careers and making sure people are progressing. You have support from other elements in the platoon, in the company, and in the sort of battalion in order to do that. But that is very much your role and responsibility as well. Let me ask you a question. Who really leads the British Army? We've gone up to this point in the video. What do you actually think? Genuinely, if you have served, who really leads the British Army? If you're a soldier, do you have a positive memory of your platoon commander? Do you have a negative memory? And let's put it in the comments so that we can show other people that are going down this route what good and bad looks like. All right, let's get back to the video. You're also in charge of welfare. So making sure that soldiers are okay. All right, so dealing with and being responsible for like 30 different individuals is a big responsibility. And, you know, you get 30 people in a room and you ask them what's going on in their lives. Everything will be completely different. Then you add in the fact that they're spending long periods away from home. Some people might be brand new. Some people might be leaving. Some people might be wanting to go on different courses, whatever that might be. It's going to be all sorts of different welfare issues at different times. So ultimately, you need to keep a tab on making sure that everyone's okay. And if they're not okay, supporting them. That might be financial support. I don't mean you giving the money, but you signposting them to the right people that can help, or helping with finances and making sure they're not spending ridiculous amounts of money on stuff. It might be like more senior soldiers, right, that have problems at home within, they're getting divorced or they're moving house, or like people have died, whatever that might be, right? So there's going to be a whole load of emotional support there as well. Again, you've got support to you as a platoon commander to help with that, but that is very much your bag, okay, to make sure that you have tabs on that stuff. And then finally, yes, there's a lot of planning involved, making sure that people are fit and ultimately operationally ready, but also you are a custodian of standards. This is drilled into you at Sandhurst. This is super important. You set the standards for your platoon. And as you always get told in the army, but definitely at Sandhurst, the standards you walk by are the standards you accept. So what do you want that platoon to look like? When I was a platoon commander, there are standards set by the battalion, there's standards set by the company, but I also had an identity that I wanted to imprint on the platoon. And I wanted us to hold ourselves to a higher standard so that we performed well. I wanted there to be a real platoon pride as well as company pride. And by and large, there was. I kind of inherited that, so I can't take all the credit for 10 platoon, who I was in command of, for having a good identity, but it did have a good identity because people before me had done that well as well. And again, that's not to say the soldiers don't have a role in that, but ultimately as a platoon commander, you are the custodian of that. You set those platoon standards. So that is an officer's role and responsibility. Okay, now we're going to focus on the NCOs. First up is the platoon sergeant. Okay, the platoon sergeant is the most senior soldier in the platoon. He's the one with the most experience, or she. When I'm saying this, is just because I was in the infantry and most of the time it was men. But forgive me, in ungendered terms, whoever that person is the most senior soldier. They are responsible for kit, equipment, logistics, all sorts. Like in the field, it's going to be ammunition, making sure people have the right kit and equipment to do whatever offensive action or whatever action you have to do in operations or an exercise. They're also in charge in camp of welfare. They support the platoon commander in that. But ultimately, like, they're more of what we call G4, which is the logistical side of the army. Okay, so food, rations, kit and equipment, as I said, ammunition, all that type of stuff. And that's actually a big responsibility because soldiers can't do their jobs if they aren't fed or if they aren't, haven't got the correct water And a sergeant's job is to understand that in a platoon context on operations as well, what they need for certain offensive actions or whatever, whether it's on exercise or whatnot. So that's actually a big responsibility, because if you don't have ammo, you can't do your job. And if you're in camp and you don't have access to the right bits of kit that you need, then again, you can't train and make sure that you're efficient or whatever. So there's a lot of stuff that they need to do there. I think the other important part, which is very much specified to platoon sergeants, is to be a mentor. You are there to mentor the platoon commander. Now, that does not mean they command the overall platoon. They are not a platoon commander. They are a second in command. So they support. The best I've seen do it as platoon sergeants understand that their role is to support the platoon commander, not ultimately to command the platoon. That doesn't mean that there can't be disagreements within the two, whether it's planning and execution, whatever that might be. But ultimately, once the platoon commander has made their decision, then it's up to the platoon sergeant to make sure that the rest of the platoon are trying to execute that decision, that plan, as best as possible. Where I've seen platoon sergeants maybe overstep the mark a little bit or not do their role as well as they could, is because they might undermine, and this is very rare, by the way, but they might undermine their platoon commander and think that their way is better. And it might be better, but that's not the point. Okay, if the platoon commander's made his decision, then actually the platoon sergeant should do everything in their power to make sure people that execute it. Obviously, if it's madness, then you can take that with a pinch of salt. The platoon sergeant is well within their right to go, boss, this is crazy. We're not doing that. We have to do it this way. But usually, platoon commanders aren't that stupid, right? They might be right at the start, but you get the gist where I'm going with this. They are not in command of the overall platoon. The exceptional ones, I've no doubt, the good ones, they could be. I'm not saying they couldn't do that. They've done a very similar battle course that platoon commanders do. They would also have done one as a section commander. But ultimately, that is not their job. Their job isn't to command the platoon like the platoon commander. Their job is to support the platoon commander and make sure all the soldiers are good to go and do what they need to do. So yeah, that mentoring is vital. They are the senior soldier. They've got the most experience. And the platoon commander, sometimes coming straight from training, has a lot less experience than his section commanders. So they need mentoring. They need someone to help them. Doesn't always happen, right? You might just get a platoon sergeant, which is brand new. They might not be that good, whatever that thing is when you get there. It doesn't always happen like that. But ideally, you will have someone that is there to help you as a young officer and mentor you. And that is very much a platoon sergeant's role. So to finish on that, a great sergeant could command the platoon, but they realise that is not their job. The best ones understand that their role is to support the platoon commander and make things go as seemingly effortlessly as possible. All right, next up, section commanders. Section commanders are corporals. So again, they would have done a battle course. This is through the infantry lens. They would have done a battle course to get there. We call it juniors down at Brecon. In the Brecon Beacons, they go and do a course where they learn all about section level and platoon level to some extent, but how to be good section commanders. They have done more section attacks than anyone in the British Army, these guys. Okay, they know exactly what they're doing when it comes to that. And in my opinion, they make or break a platoon. If you have 3 exceptional section commanders, then it's likely things are going to go well. If you have 3 bad section commanders, it's very likely things will not go well. They are so important to the platoon. They have a job similar to the platoon commander of making sure that their section plan goes well. So platoon commander gives his orders, section commanders, yeah boss, understood. They will then translate it into the individuals of what they want to do in their position in the field or in the battle space. They are ultimately responsible. These are the guys that are kicking down the door, essentially, if it was in a war context, but also trying to make sure that every man in the section knows what they're doing. So it is a unbelievably important role. It really, really is. They are, in my experience, usually fierce. It doesn't mean that they're horrible people, by the way, but they are aggressive when they need to be. They are fierce. They love soldiering for the most part, and they are a commander. Okay, so they are there to command their section and get the result. So it's super important role, and a platoon commander cannot be successful without these 3. So I've touched a little bit on what they do on operations there, on exercise. What do they actually do in camp? Well, to be honest with you, this is actually where I saw them get a little bit dejected in camp because they're undervalued. they are there very much there as disciplinarians, I think, to make sure that soldiers know what they're doing, etc., etc. But I think they are not utilised as best as they could be in camp. I actually think in camp they need to be given more responsibility. This is just my my sort of understanding of it through, I guess, my little bit of the army in my experience. But I think they need to be given way more responsibility in camp, because they are super capable people, and I think sometimes they can get a little bit bored in camp. Yes, they've done a lot of the grunt work before, like they've been the private soldiers, they've been the Section 2 ICs, which is a relentless role for most people. There is a lot of pluses that come with being a section commander, with being a corporal, but also they can be utilised a lot more effectively than I think sometimes they are. Definitely were in my case, and I'll hold my hands up to that. Sometimes I didn't utilise them as best as I could, especially mainly in camp. But knowing what I know now, I'd give them more responsibility. I'd ask more from them, because 9 times out of 10, they did what I needed them to do way better than I thought they would do it anyway. And finally, I think I should mention that they also mentor the platoon commander. Mine definitely did, because I had a couple of platoon sergeants, and then there was a gap for a period as well. And I was super young as well, as in like not in age, but just in terms of experience. So I needed them to help when we were away and deployed and all that type of stuff. And I think very much the platoon commander sets the standards. The NCOs very much maintain the standards. Okay, they are there as disciplinarians, kind of like a good dressing room in terms of a sports team. They make sure that any squabbles or anything like that is all resolved way before it hits the platoon commander's desk. If a soldier's coming to me as a platoon commander because they've done something wrong, it should almost be like one of the last moments, right? The section commander should have sorted it. And if it's a big issue, then obviously it has to come to me. But kind of like a football team, most of it can be resolved in the dressing room before it gets to the manager. If we think of the manager being the platoon commander, it's not too dissimilar to that. But sometimes they can overstep the mark. Okay, these are guys that want to push the boundaries a lot. And I mean that in a really positive way. They always want to go forward. They always want to be aggressive. They always want to push the boundaries. And sometimes a good platoon commander knows when to just pull them back a little bit, sometimes for their own good. Okay, and it's the control element. And I mean that in an operational sense, but also in camp sometimes. I'm not saying platoon commanders are faultless. I definitely wasn't. But it's important to understand that sometimes you are there to control that platoon as well, and control individuals, because it might be on the piss, pushing the boundaries, whatever it is, right? For those of you that have served, you know exactly what I'm on about. And there's just an element of control that sometimes is needed. To be honest with you, I was never that good at that, especially if we were out and about, but you get the gist of it. But also they live with the blokes. They live with the private soldiers in the block. So they will get to know the soldiers way better than the platoon commander and the platoon sergeant, because they're living with them on a daily basis. So, you know, usually they're quite close, but even if they're not quite close, they get to see what they really like. My screws corporals were insanely good at keeping their finger on the pulse of what was going on in the block, and if there were issues, bringing it to me. And I remember specifically before we deployed to Afghanistan, there were a few issues with a couple of individuals, and they were really concerned about deploying with them, and we managed to basically get it sorted beforehand. Either their behaviour rectified, or we made sure that they weren't deploying with us because we were concerned about how they'd fare in Afghanistan. Not that we were doing anything super punchy, but still we wanted like the A team going, right? So I think that's an important part, is they can really sort of influence a platoon commander's decision in a positive way, because they have their finger on the pulse of what's going on far more than a platoon commander. Okay, finally, I want to move on to part 4, which is the balance. And I think this is the key point here. So we've looked at how a platoon is structured, the roles and responsibilities at the platoon commander, sergeant and section commander level. I really want to focus, and this is probably the key part of this video, is the balance. If you're still listening, and you might have already seen in the comments people chopsing off about this, the balance is so important. And I'm going to use the analogy of a football team as well. But to be the best football team, you have to have good people in every position. Especially you have to have leaders. And these people that I've mentioned, all ranks, are leaders. Platoon commander is the overall leader. Let's call him the manager of the football team. Then you've got the platoon sergeant. Let's call him, you know, maybe the captain. Then you've got the section commanders. My beloved Arsenal, right? Let's use them as an example. Platoon commander, you could call Mikel Arteta. Odegaard, you'd probably have as the platoon sergeant. And then you might have your section commanders as other people that are super experienced and sort of leaders in that dressing room. Declan Rice, Bukayo Saka, other people, right, that are there to just get people over the line or whatever. So Gabrielle, right? I don't know if you like Arsenal. If you don't, that analogy might be lost on you. But anyway, don't come at me in the comments just because I support Arsenal. But you get the picture, right? So it's super. To be really successful, everyone has to be good. Now, is there banter between the roles? 100%. There has to be. But usually, in my experience, it was healthy. But there shouldn't be any direct competition. Between the section commanders, yes, that's healthy competition, but there shouldn't be any competition between who's trying to command the platoon, between the platoon commander and platoon sergeant. Everything should be working in harmony. So if you're in a platoon or you ever experience this where everything is just smooth, that's because everyone is doing their job as they should. Everything is just happening, everything's clicking, platoon sergeant's doing stuff on time, platoon commander's doing stuff on time, everything's planned well and stuff. It's not always going to be the case, but typically if there are no issues or major issues, it's because people are doing their jobs well. If there's constant issue after issue after issue, someone is dropping the ball. Then it becomes a case of these relationships are so important. I say this all the time in a lot of my videos, but the army is a people-based organization. It's all about relationships, building relationships, maintaining relationships, and just getting the most out of each other. The army works on orders, right? So you could ultimately order people to do something, but it's a pretty shit way of having to get things done all the time. I'd much rather people do a task because they respect me and they want to get it done well, rather than I'm going to have to order people to do it all the time, because that definitely isn't the most effective way. Good platoon commanders develop the soldiers in all roles. How the relationship works the other way is that command team, who I've just mentioned, all of those people, are there to support that platoon commander. And especially in the first 6 months, 12 months, there's a lot of learning that needs to be done. And there's a lot of learning that will happen through mistakes, but ultimately they are there to support that platoon commander. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship if done correctly. So finally, to wrap this up, there are people that will never get it. I want to be really firm on this point because I see them in the comments all the time, and usually they are just little gobshites who get really annoyed, and they might have had a bad experience. So I want to say that they might have had a bad experience with a platoon commander, but they also might have just been a bit shit themselves and never understood the relationship and how it really works. Hopefully, most of my men, most of my blokes would look back and go, oh, he was a decent boss and they understood how it worked. And overall, I look back, especially my command team, 2 ICs as well were great. Loads of my private soldiers were great. But I look back and I also think really highly of them. Hopefully it works both ways. I stay in contact with a lot of them, so hopefully I don't think they'd call me and text me if they thought I was a complete shithouse. But you get what I mean. Some people will have had a bad experience, but if you are an aspiring officer, don't think, and also if you're an aspiring soldier, don't think that officers just do nothing all the time, because it is bullshit. It is actually bullshit. So, to come back to the question at the very beginning, who really leads the British Army in a platoon context? The platoon commander. That is the right answer. The platoon commander is the leader, but he can only be successful is if his team are good. If you have a good platoon commander and a shit team, they will never be successful. If you have a shit platoon commander and a great team, there is more chance of being successful. But the platoon commander is ultimately responsible, and it's your responsibility to earn their trust. Your ultimate aim is to do right by them at all times. Right doesn't mean being kind. Right doesn't mean giving in to all of their demands or anything they want. It means doing the right thing. And sometimes doing the right thing is awkward conversations, holding them to account, holding standards, maintaining them, keeping them high, and progressing their careers, and always having sort of their best interest top of your mind at all times. To me, that's what success looks like. If this video has been useful to you, please do click like, please click subscribe, and you can click the bell to be notified every time I upload a video. That's it for this week's video. Hopefully you got some value out of it, and I will see you next week with a brand new video in a bit.